My name is Lauren Weiniger. For those that don't know me, I am the co-founder and CEO of the Menopause. So with the Menopause, we're building a new universe for women's hormonal health and longevity, driven by Elsa, our AI health concierge for women's health and longevity. I say she's the world-class health concierge every woman deserves, but you could afford or access until now. And as part of this journey that I've been going through for my own health and hormones and everything, I have been fascinated with peptides and have started on my own peptide journey. And I know that basically every woman I know feels the same. And I've been so honored and grateful to have these incredible experts from across the health spectrum really guiding and educating me and our whole platform on the magical new advancements, some of them not so new, that are really helping women and men navigate health and aging on their own terms. So I'm so excited to gather a few of my favorite experts here today to bring some of this incredible wisdom, knowledge, expertise, etc., to you, and really help you make your best, most confident, informed health decisions for your health journey. So I am delighted to introduce you to our panelists. We have Anissa Buckley. She is the Chief Longevity Officer at the Menopause. I could not be more overjoyed to have her here. Dr. Oz Garcia, a nutritionist to the stars, including some of your favorite household names, and Dr. Leonard Pastrana, the founder of New BioAge and world-leading expert in perimenopause and in peptide therapy. I thought I would let each of them jump in and introduce themselves a little more detail. Starting back to front, Dr. Leonard, I'd love for you to hop in.
Sure. Hi guys, my name is Leonard. I am my doctorate degree is in pharmacy, actually, and what I focus mostly on is educating medical practitioners, specifically on longevity medicine. But one of our big emphasis is on peptide therapy. There has been a big gap between the knowledge of what's happening in research in peptide and what's actually happening in clinical practice. And so one of the things that we do is we help guide practitioners in understanding how peptides are working. The dosage, things like bioavailability, how well they're working, what to combine peptides with. And we also run a longevity assessment center where we're very obsessed with how well these peptides are working. So we do a lot of longevity assessments when it comes to DEXA scans and body composition and metabolic breath analysis, and a number of different assessments to see how well these peptides are really working and how to pivot treatment plans. And so it's a lot of fun, and I'm really excited about the topic today because there's nothing that accelerates aging, or very few things that accelerate aging as much as this topic that's so important when it comes to menopause.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Dr. Oz, over to you.
I've been involved in the functional health field for, I'd say, close to 4 decades. I started to get interested in lifespanning early on based on a book called Anti-Aging, which came out in 1981. By then, I was already deep into racing and running, and it affected most of my thinking over the decades, where we now run a center based out of the Upper West Side of New York. We're interested primarily in self-optimization, in what I would call being anti-fragile. To that extent, we have our own clinic. We do our diagnostics here, but we're deeply embedded in the role of lifestyle, quality of sleep, exposure to outdoors, all the way to more complex issues like Leonard spoke about in terms of diagnostics. We'll do a deep dive there, looking at your genetic makeup all the way to mitochondrial function. I'd say beyond that, the kind of coaching that we do, which involves the deep look of using peptides themselves, the right supplementation that I think has a massive measurable impact on an aging body. I could go on, but I'll pass the baton on to Anissa.
Amazing.
I will pick up the ball here. I am, first of all, honored to be on the panel with these two incredible experts. My background is slightly different. Started off with Fortune 500 training, Procter & Gamble, Sprint, and Reebok, and then moved into my own startup. So I had 2 wellness startups that I exited both. And pivotal year 2014 really changed everything for me and put me down a personal path as well as a professional path with peptide therapy. So when my parents died and I went through a divorce, I started undertaking extreme adventure, which sounds a lot like what Dr. Oz has done himself. And I know Leonard's very involved in this as well, as looking at endurance athletes, looking at the impact of all of the different lifestyle factors as well as peptide therapy. And so what I think I'm bringing today is personal experience, the past decade or so, undertaking extreme adventure using peptide therapies for optimization, and then moving more into the menopausal phases of life and helping work with women over the past 4 years with both peptide therapy as well as other interventions that can help to reduce, if not reverse, some of the impact of menopause. And so that's what brings me here today. And I'm thrilled to be with Lauren and the team. And we've got a lot of exciting stuff coming down the menopause track.
Amazing. Anissa also just regularly summits Mount Kilimanjaro and takes women over 55 on adventure travel across the Grand Canyon. And so walking billboard and inspiration for peptide therapy and the magic of living healthy life. So great. Well, let's get into it. So to start off, we wanted to start kind of higher level. Dr. Oz, I honestly learned basically everything I knew about initially peptides from you, from this really amazing biohacker group that we were in that started a lot of my interest here. So I thought we'd start off by opening up that wisdom to this larger group, to give us a little high level of what are peptides, how do women start thinking about how to incorporate them into our lives, and anything else you need to know from that level.
That's a big question. There's history with peptides. I'd say probably going back about 10, 15 years ago, where they were highly experimental and they were part of an emerging group of nutrients, including what are called nootropics, which are very specific nutrients that have a measurable effect on the human brain and its performance. Nootropic coming from the Greek, meaning increased intelligence. Peptides themselves are derivatives of proteins. They're amino acids. Amino acids are building blocks that actually will come together and produce a protein like an egg. So an egg is a complete protein. It has 22, 23 amino acids, pretty much the ones that will make a piece of chicken, a side of steak, beans, for instance. But you can take the amino acids out of them. You can take glycine, for instance, mix it with carnosine, mix it with serine, and you now can fold them into a configuration not found in nature, but it has a very natural effect on the body. That's a peptide. And so you can take very novel configurations of amino acids, and each one has a very selective impact on human performance and the human brain, on the heart, on the quality of our skin, the ability to build muscle, energy, mood, states of mind. So the field of peptides has moved dramatically. There, I would say, in terms of a scale, you can do a lot more with peptides these days in terms of regulating the speed at which you're aging than you could have at any other point historically with just using supplementation, let's say, right?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of women are hearing about this more and more, in part because of the GLP success and part other things. I want to talk a little bit about, how that's the difference between the GLPs versus other peptides on all of this kind of a thing, so people know how to think about it.
I'm going to say a little bit here, then I want to pass it over to Lisa and Leonard. GLP-1s are unique peptides in that what they do is regulate blood sugar primarily. There are different GLP-1s. There's retatrutide, tetratazide, semaglutide. The two most commercially known peptides like Ozempic and Wegovy are made from the basic semaglutide and tritepazide, which is our very unique GLP-1s. One is a little bit more intense, like Manjaro, for instance. It regulates 3 different aspects of the way that we can control weight, behavior, cravings. So that would regulate blood sugar, parts of the craving brain, and even metabolic function. Whereas semaglutide will affect only one, which is the regulation of blood sugar. Although that can have a massive impact, let's say, on our ability to regulate weight, metabolic function, and so on. It's almost like picking an ice cream flavor. Which one do you like better? And that can be very subjective. What am I going to do better on in terms of which GLP am I going to pick?
Perfect. Yeah, Anissa, did you want to add to that?
I think Dr. Oz summarized that really well. What I would add to that is what I've heard a lot from the women I've worked with has been, and I think Oprah has said this, it's basically their each of the GLPs impact on the brain and on those two appetite hormones, so ghrelin and leptin, and in terms of really shutting down that food noise that a lot of us have had, whether it is emotional, whether it is triggered by blood sugar swings, whatnot, but really it's that ability to get that appetite under control, which has made a huge difference. And then the outcome of that, or several of the outcomes I've seen, have just been drops in cholesterol, blood sugar, blood pressure, to the point that women who maybe were previously on medication for those things have been able to get off medication. So it's had some really nice, long-lasting, I'll call them longevity and health span indicating outcomes. And I'll throw it over to Leonard. I'm sure he has stuff to add there as well.
Yeah, GLP-1s have been amazing. As a pharmacist, I've seen a number of different medications come out to the market, and I can't even think of something outside of maybe even something like statins that have had such a massive impact or have been used so frequently by so many people as GLP-1s. And what's funny about GLP-1s is they were initially studied in neurodegenerative disease when they were first coming out. And so their impact on so many things, like Anissa was saying, not only on metabolism or diabetes or blood sugar or weight loss, but it has profound impact on cognitive function, on inflammatory states, on even they're looking at it for like osteoarthritis right now. The triple agonist retatrutide, one of the phase 3 trials right now, they're looking at it in osteoarthritis and sleep apnea. And so this is one of those compounds that, because it has such a profound impact on weight and glucose control, that is so important to metabolism overall, you're seeing that because it can control that so much, it's having impact on all these other disease states, which is kind of what we're talking about a little bit today, is that impact of things like what is the impact of perimenopause and menopause on the overall system of longevity and how it's accelerating aging. And GLP-1s become such an important tool in this conversation that we're going to have today.
Add one more thing to that, just because I think it's very relevant to this group. I don't know that it's 100%, proven out, but there is some clinical research to indicate also that semaglutide can have an impact on hot flashes. So there was a study done, a couple of years ago that kind of have led down the path to believing that it can help with severe hot flash situations. And I'm not sure we've teased out whether that's partly the weight loss shift that's helped with that, or if it's 100% just the actual peptide that's causing it, but just kind of an interesting one to add into the mix here.
Yeah, I saw that. Super interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of where we can circle back on this later. Part of what we wanted to do here today is also help women just navigate it's an evolving landscape, and it's not that many of these things haven't been studied for a long time and are proven, but it's also evolving and we're learning. So again, we're here to help you make the right decision with or without your doctor, etc. For the next section, we wanted to go kind of symptom by symptom. So thought we would take a few of the most common, most disturbing, disruptive symptoms that tend to happen with perimenopause, menopause, and other hormonal imbalance. And I'd love to have the panelists kind of share how they would approach each of these symptoms and challenges from a peptide perspective, but also noting when relevant, what else, right? Like these things aren't usually in isolation. So feel free to give as full of a story as you can. I think that people are really interested in how this integrates into their full lives. So we'll start with sleep. Who wants to jump in and start? Anissa.
Oh.
Feel free. I like to follow you because you kind of set everything up well. So feel free to take off. Or not.
I'll go ahead and take a shot at it.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So when it comes to sleep, it is just so important for everything else that we do. We were talking about metabolism. There's a lot of studies showing that sleep, or if you have the deterioration of sleep or you're sleep deprived, can actually mimic insulin resistance. It can mimic diabetes. And so we typically think about it as this recovery type of thing, and we need to sleep so we can have more energy. It's more than that. It has an impact on overall metabolism and your glucose control. And so this is why it's so important. One of the things that we typically isn't talked about a lot about when it comes to sleep and peptides is that some of the growth hormone peptides actually impact sleep, We know that when you go to bed late at night, your biggest pulse of growth hormone is around 2 o'clock in the morning. And so the way that we secrete hormone naturally is we pulse it out 3 to 5 times a day, but the biggest amplitude of pulse happens at bedtime. And so these growth hormone peptides, they actually stimulate the anterior pituitary to secrete your own growth hormone. And so this is one of the things that we've seen, some of the best impact when it comes to sleep, is that these growth hormone peptides like samorelin or CJC-norepinephrine, tesamorelin is another one, is that they improve slow wave sleep. And so they can improve deep sleep. And it's kind of hit or miss. I've seen some patients where they're like, that was the best sleep I've ever had. And some patients where, I didn't necessarily feel it. But, those are peptides that are typically used for muscle mass and body composition. But we're finding it has a really profound impact on sleep is the growth hormone peptides.
And there too, I think it's important to note that the reason they work so well in terms of supporting sleep is growth hormone actually works as a sedative, right? You are pulsing it during sleep, and it works to slow down the speed at which you're aging. So using growth hormone releasing peptides, like the ones that Leonard just mentioned, or GHRP2 or GHRP6, they have a scale in terms of same thing like Leonard said, and what I said earlier in terms of the flavor. Which one are you going to respond to the best? Which one is going to help induce sleep also? There's one called DSIP, Delta Sleep Inducing Peptide, that has a highly measurable effect on states of mind, mood. When you're sleeping, the brainwave that you're producing is a very slow brainwave called Delta. Right now, we're all pretty much, I'd say, in beta, which is pretty fast moving. And you kind of want to drop yourself into Delta brainwaves. So the growth hormone releasing peptides will do that as they keep your body younger, as they maintain lean muscle mass, whereas you can have something like DSIP drop you very quickly into Delta with just an effect on brainwaves. This is what's so fascinating in terms of using peptides for different purposes, and in a way they kind of repurpose themselves, right? So you're going to get two for the price of one in the way that Leonard just said, which is you can get growth hormone release, wake up in the morning, and over a matter of days, literally, you can see improvement in your lean muscle mass, quality of skin too, and we're probably going to get into that a little bit later with some other peptides. But I think I just wanted to validate what Leonard is saying in that regard with certain peptides. There's another one that I would say is very useful for increasing the tips of DNA telomeres. It's called apidolon. And apidolon tends to convert into melatonin and serotonin. Fascinating that this particular peptide, which is used to slow down the speed at which you're aging, which is by making your telomeres grow a little bit. Telomeres are the tips of your DNA, like I said, which corrupt and get smaller with age. And wear and tear, gravity, moving around, whatever, and genetics, but using apidolon also, which can be taken orally as a capsule or a tablet, can help sleep unbelievably at states of mind and mood.
Amazing. And one thing I just want to point out, if you're sitting there scribbling notes, trying to keep track of all these names and acronyms, etc., don't worry. So we're going to have a lot of resources for you, with written as well as after the event, as well as partner programs that and ones that we'll be hosting ourselves. So there will be many a resource. Feel free to continue to take notes. Also, feel free to, if you have questions, I know a couple of you have already been asking, just pop them into the Q&A and we'll get them answered as we go. On sleep, and this really applies to all of them, I think some of this can seem really overwhelming to people as they start. What's the guidance on how people know, obviously working with their doctor and or with partners that we can recommend, but what's the best way for people to know where to start with some of these? Are there tests that we should be doing? Is there a general lay of the land that people should be aware of when it comes to that?
Yeah, for sure. I always recommend, going to a medical provider that's been certified in peptide therapy. The peptide therapy can sound very complicated, but you want someone that has some experience and has at least gone through some of the peptide certification, and has some experience, because they want to do an initial assessment. I think the big thing with peptides and everything in longevity medicine is to assess what is what is the one thing for that patient personalized that's going to make the biggest difference in their quality of life? Right? Like how well they're living, which is it's a very important part of the longevity definition. Is it sleep that's impacting them? Is it stress that's impacting them? Is it metabolic dysfunction? What is going to be the one thing that they can do? Someone can personalize peptides for them that's going to make the biggest difference right away. And so depending on what that is, that medical provider can kind of guide you through that assessment, looking at your blood work, doing things like body compositions, talking to you, having a good understanding of what's impacting you, so they can help you, walk through and decide what's the right peptide or combination of peptides for each individual person.
Amazing. Anissa, on sleep, do you have any more to add, or should we move on? Yeah.
I'll jump in for a second. I think I swing to the other side, which I know Leonard's probably been the door open for me on hormones. So hormones can have a real impact, of course, losing estrogen and progesterone, which both contribute to or support serotonin and, melatonin, which is a precursor to melatonin, which can help you induce a more calm, relaxed feeling, as can progesterone, which again, we lose that. So there's a couple things I would say just from a basic supplementation standpoint. I know we're not here to talk all day about supplements, but it is really about layering in different lifestyle interventions, looking at different supplementation and looking at peptide therapies in combination sometimes. And so things like looking at a progesterone supporting complex, if not progesterone. I know we'll talk about HRT a little bit later on today. But really kind of what can you do to induce the progesterone, that may be waning in your body and kind of resurface that. And also looking at supporting other neurotransmitters that can help to calm the brain. So GABA would be one that was talked about a lot. So like a GABA complex can be helpful in terms of getting you into that more restful state before kind of dozing off. So just my thoughts in addition to everything they said. I know I love DSIP. I certainly love the hormone secretagogues that Leonard mentioned. So I'm a big fan of both of those, but they already beat me to it. So
amazing.
Also, just to add to that, she's really quite correct about GABA. There's a nootropic, for instance, that is a combination of niacin, which is vitamin B3, and a GABA molecule is called picamelon. It was developed in Eastern Europe. You can actually procure it here. But the niacin molecule, the B3, drives the GABA deep into the brain. And it has a very therapeutic effect on states of mind, mood, and quality of sleep. So I can't validate that enough in terms of what Anissa said. And also just to another point with Leonard, I think quantifying your sleep is really important. For some people, it's using a Whoop band. For some of us, it's using the Oura ring, so that you know qualitatively what's going on during the night. You get up in the morning and look at your app and see if you had an adequate amount of deep sleep, REM sleep, all the kind of activity that occurs, so that you wake up and you've got the benefits that you're looking for, not just like Leonard said, which is to use sleep as a means to be rested and think that you're going to get up in the morning and fly around. Plenty of people wake up anxious, plenty of people wake up still tired, feeling like they need more sleep. So I think the benefits of supplementation, to Anissa's point, certainly the peptides, and a means by which you can measure what's occurring during sleep too.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting too. Like the more you learn, the more complex it gets, but that's what we're trying to do, is simplify it. But I know people having trouble falling asleep versus those like waking up early at 3 a.m., which is a big issue, versus not getting enough deep sleep. So I think all of these in combination, right? Having the information, peptides, hormones when appropriate, supplementation when needed, all work together to really help women and men take control over this. And that's what we're here to help you navigate. So let's move on to brain fog. And brain fog, cognitive challenges, I want to touch on also ADHD, right? Which obviously impacts people across the board. It also, for many, many women, drastically increases / emerges in kind of menopausal range. We want to understand the why, and more importantly, what can we do about it? And memory as well. Anissa, do you want to start?
I can start. I'm not sure I can give you the why on ADHD. I'm not even sure it's fully understood at this point, except, with the loss of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, It impacts everything, the neurotransmitters, those modulators in your brain that keep everything sharp and functioning. As they're declining, we can lose up to 30% of brain function in this phase of life. And I personally can attest to that. I feel like I've had that happen. Coming back, one of the peptides that can help with that is Semax, which is, I have to caveat and say, not everything we're talking about is 100% available in, the US or approved by the FDA at this point, but it's one that can help to improve the BDNF or brain-derived neurotropic factor, which can do things like, again, inspire and help learning and memory, which you very much need at that phase of life. So for me, Semax is one to consider if you're in this phase of life, as well as several other supplements. But I'll kind of kick it over to both Dr. Oz and to Dr. Leonard, let them give their thoughts on this, and then we can come back if we need to supplementation.
Leonard, do you want to take it?
Sure. So when I think of brain fog or cognitive issues, a way to kind of understand, what's happening a little bit better is that it's not just perimenopause or menopausal situation. If anybody was to get immune dysregulated, or if anybody was to have poor metabolism or gain weight really quickly or have poor metabolism, cognitive issues are always going to be impacted. I've worked with a lot of different peptides. Cemax is a great one that, like Anissa mentioned. Selank is another great one that is another cognitive peptide that actually works on GABA, like Dr. Oz was saying previously, but it also has this impact on cognitive function. One of the biggest things that we see is this rise in cortisol, this rise in stress that is resistance to outcomes, not just in perimenopause, but in any other type of disease state that we're trying to achieve with other patients, where stress, anxiety, sleep increases cortisol levels and creates this inflammatory environment where nothing else that we're doing is working. And until you can handle that, you're going to have the brain fog, you're going to have the cognition issues. And so we're taking this full approach where you can't forget about metabolism. So GLP-1s will actually work really well to decrease that inflammatory state, to improve metabolism, improve glucose levels. But then we always want to add things like Selank as anxiolytics. One of the biggest things that we teach medical providers is that they're always coming to us with, what do I do when my patient plateaus? Or what do I do when they're resistant to outcomes? And some of the first questions we ask, it's either like a gut health thing or it's a stress and anxiety thing. And if you have this stressful, high cortisol environment, nothing else that you're doing is going to work. So this is where Selank peptide comes in. It's an amazing peptide that usually helps providers turn the corner with their patients. Another peptide that's kind of an old one that people don't even realize is a peptide is something called oxytocin. Oxytocin, known as the love hormone, it's got a very sedating, relaxing effect. Sometimes when people have so much on their mind and they're so busy with this day where you're going, you have a million things on your mind with work, the brain fog isn't necessarily something is happening in your brain. It's because you're overloaded with so much information, it's hard to focus on any one thing. And just being able to relax in the moment clears up a lot of that brain fog. So oxytocin it's a nasal spray. It can come injectable, it can come as troches, but most of the studies have been as a nasal spray. And this is an amazing one that can help people with anxiety right there in the moment. And it's another one that I probably should have mentioned when it comes to sleep, because Lauren, you mentioned, hey, there's a difference between someone have a problem falling asleep and there's a difference between somebody who wakes up at 3 a.m. I'm that 3 a.m. person. I hit the bed and I'm out, but by 3 a.m. I'm up and I'm awake. Well, oxytocin for those patients that have trouble falling asleep, it's going to get them into more of a relaxed state where they can improve and fall asleep. So it's always like this full-pronged approach with peptides, and that's what makes them so great, is that you can combine all of them together very easily. One of the things as a pharmacist that we look at are side effects and drug interactions. GLP-1, Selank, oxytocin, they go perfectly well together.
Yeah, I think that's one of the very cool things as well, because they're either naturally occurring or they're naturally occurring things put together, right? And so, we've talked a lot about GABA here, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think of GABA as like brake fluid kind of for your brain. Like it's naturally occurring, it helps us calm down, but we're not always producing enough of it. So we're taking different peptides are acting on different parts of our brain to produce more of it. And you can take different ones together that do that more or less more effectively. Is that kind of correct?
Well, it's not only that it's a braking system on glutamine, which is produced when you're under stress and when you're losing your shit, so to say, right? You're moving into high anxiety. So what you want to do is you want to have something that also not only works as a braking system, but can elevate mood. And we're a society which is interested pharmaceutically, primarily in trying to lift up serotonin and dopamine. So to the negligence of things like oxytocin and GABA, and there's a few more. There are cannabinoids, which can affect your mood, and there are people that are more sensitive to those. And you can keep slicing the pie in that way too. So how many people try on serotonin, perimenopausally and postmenopausal, and it doesn't work because they may not be responsive to serotonin so much as they need the lift that they're going to get from GABA. Or oxytocin, on a low level, maybe as atrocious or as a nasal spray. So it's important to understand the complexity of the brain in that regard, in terms of which neurotransmitter blows out. But you're never going to go wrong by trying to get GABA up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and on that note, and there's a question that came in on that. I think it's might as well address it now. Are there downsides to peptides? What are the risks, if any? And I know it varies by peptide, but we might break this up and go ahead and address that since it's kind of come up within the context of this, but across the board.
Yeah, sure. So peptides are just like any other supplement or medication. They're very unique. Each one has a different risk profile. They're very, very safe. As a pharmacist, one of my jobs is to deal with side effects. And I get doctor calls, we get patient calls in the hundreds and thousands probably in the last 4 or 5 years. And I can tell you, out of everything, I've been in traditional medicine, I've been in the hospital system, peptides are the least thing that we get phone calls about when it comes to side effects or anything like that. GLP-1s probably are the ones that we get the most questions about when it comes to nausea. But it's a great question, and each one is individual, right? For GLP-1s, dosing is very important, and how fast you're titrating up for someone not to get nauseous. We talked about growth hormone peptides. Depending on how potent that growth hormone peptide is, a lot of physicians, a lot of doctors like to cycle it. Sometimes they do it for 5 days on, 2 days off. Some do it for 3 months at a time, and then take a break. It depends on what growth hormone peptide. Peptides like tesamorelin are more potent, and they increase what we call IGF-1. And so those are maybe ones that you might want to look at an IGF-1 level if you're taking it continuously. So it's very different depending on a lot of the different peptides, but pretty safe to take continuously. A couple that we cycle here and there, but only a couple of them.
Yeah. Anyone else want to add to that bit? All right, cool. So I'm so glad that you brought up anxiety on that brain fog, cognitive challenges part, because that's the other thing is these things are all very related, right? And that's the other kind of beautiful thing with peptides as opposed to, I think sometimes in addition to, but things like antidepressants or other kind of pharma approaches, where it's actually more helpful in treating like the whole body. I learned recently that, cortisol essentially eats your progesterone in some ways, right? And so you're having your estrogen maybe spiking, and because you're estrogen dominant in Peri, and then it's driving up your cortisol, and you're just stressed in general because life is stressful. And then that's further pushing down your progesterone, and it's causing all this chaos. And that's anxiety, and that's brain fog, and that's memory loss. And some of these peptides individually and or together, it sounds like, and I've seen already myself in early days, that it actually resets and balances the system, which is what we're all striving for anyway. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Let's move on let's go to hot flashes. The one thing that everyone knew or knows about menopause and perimenopause, which is absolutely not the only symptom and definitely not the first symptom for many, but definitely one that is highly disruptive. And we want to help women navigate this as best as possible. Who wants to start with hot flashes? Over to you.
Yeah,
Good choice.
it's the woman thing.
Yeah.
So we know that, estrogen in your body, really helps to thermoregulate you, sort of affecting your hippocampus. And actually just, again, sort of helping with that, keeping the body at a certain, homeostatic level. But obviously drop in estrogen can cause a lot of crazy things to happen in terms of how your body reacts to that. And so, kind of going down the list from a peptide standpoint, I don't know that there's a lot I can personally speak to here, but as I mentioned earlier, semaglutide in particular has been called out. I don't know that the other ones don't have the same effect. I know semaglutide has been shown to have an impact on hot flashes. So that would be one option. And then there's kisspeptin, which is another hormone regulating peptide, which can really, I think, have a benefit here in terms of, kind of impacting the brain and impacting the areas that are driving the hot flashes. It's probably not an area I've got expertise in terms of the peptide side of things. I think on the other end, from the supplementation standpoint, we know that Astrovera has been very, very successful, clinically proven to help reduce hot flashes up to 83%. So that's one thing we feel strongly about. And then linking that with pycnogenol, which is another sort of maritime bark, that combination of the two can actually even enhance your reduction of peptides of hot flashes even further. So I think for me, I'd probably go down the supplementation path on this one initially, if I wasn't looking at GLP-1s. And again, knowing that kisspeptin isn't necessarily available all the time for everybody. So that might be one option. And then the other thing is there's kind of a newer devices coming out that are shown to kind of impact our body's ability to feel a hot flash coming on and to maybe ward that off to some degree. So Ember Wave is one that's out there. Thermoband is another. Both are sort of wristbands that can actually help to kind of tap into that thermoregulation generated by your wrist and kind of the temperature control device there, and help you to know ahead of time, and again, sort of keeps that body cool and actually has the reverse effect of also heating your body up if it's getting too cold. So thermoregulation in general. So those are a couple of things I would think about, really high level. Yeah, from a peptide standpoint, I'm not sure I'm sure that the other two gentlemen will have a lot more to add there.
Yeah.
I don't know any peptide.
Yeah. I think on hot flashes, it's
That regulates
Yeah.
towards natural hormone replacement therapy.
yeah. And
Yeah,
we'll
yes.
have some time at the end to dive into that a little bit more as well. So, and all of these things work in tandem. So that's good to know. Next, let's go to energy and fatigue. I know so many women, the biggest complaint, and for everyone, right, who does want more energy, but there's having more energy and then there's getting that just absolute fatigue. I know there's a lot of different ones. As you're going through these as well, I think I'd love for, when you're listing a specific one, take a little thought to a little of the how it works, the why, and then when relevant, like how it's administered, right? Some things really injectables only, some things can be nasal spray or subcutaneous, etc. So it's good for people to kind of understand it and understand for some of them, when it's really going to drastically impact the effectiveness. As you know, there's a lot of people out there marketing a lot of things as miracle cures and whatnot. And so sometimes, for BPC, I know you can actually take and be very effective orally, but many of them you can't. So just try to be mindful of those things as we're educating our lovely audience. All right, energy. I'm going to call on Leonard. Would you like to start?
Yeah, the way that I think about energy is very similar to brain fog, right? So they're very closely related. So again, hitting home on that metabolism side of things. People that have poor metabolism, or you have poor glucose control, that is literally impacting your energy. Your inability to take carbohydrates and turn them into energy, that dysfunction is going to play an impact. Because usually people want to know, what is that pill or that compound, that peptide that's going to make me not have that, feel like I have ADD. And so I'll lean again on fixing that first. Now, when it comes to just straight up peptides that improve energy, I'm also thinking about how well they can exercise, right? So one of the things that we found is that when we can help patients exercise better and recover from exercise, that improves their overall energy. And so one of the things that we are looking at are peptides like MOTS-c, right? So MOTS-c is a mitochondrial peptide. It's injectable, so it's not something, to your point, Lauren, that you would want to take orally. It's not going to be bioavailable. It's an injectable peptide. It works specifically on the mitochondria. It works directly on AMPK. AMPK is basically your body's ability to sense this deficit in energy, and it causes this chain reaction of all the things that we like decreases in inflammation, improvements in energy, cellular renewal. And so this is something that we used to utilize when it was available in the pharmacy world. It's actually not available there anymore. But that mitochondrial peptide was great for helping people exercise. I'll go back to things like the growth hormone peptides, like CJC and ipamorelin and sermorelin. Why? Because they help patients recover from exercise better. So we want people to exercise, but if you're already feeling fatigued, if you're already feeling like you have a lack of energy, it's hard to get to the gym. Also, when you haven't worked out in a while or exercised, you're super tired after. And so what we want to do is include peptides like these growth hormone peptides that improve how fast and well they recover from exercise. so they can get those cognitive and those energy type benefits from exercise. Using things like BPC 157 is typically known as a gut health peptide. But one of the things that people don't know about it is it improves growth hormone receptors. So it helps people recover from exercise a little bit better, and it improves those growth hormone peptides. And BPC can be taken oral or injectable, depending on how you're using it. So that's how I'm thinking. I'm not thinking too much about an energy peptide that's just going to stimulate like this kind of energy in the moment, like caffeine. I'm thinking about the overall efficiency of how well their body is operating. What peptides can I use to help get them to exercise better so that they can have natural energy? Because we don't want to necessarily lean on something like, you know, a caffeine type of peptide or a supplement. So that's how I'm thinking through those things.
That makes sense. Dr. Oz, anything to add? I mean, I know we've all
Oh,
seen and I'm about
plenty.
to do the NADs of the world and all of that.
Here we need to jump categories for a moment. There are remarkable supplements. There's a version of NAD called ENADH, ANADA, right? So it's NAD with a hydrogen molecule added at the end. You can get it as a lozenge. This was developed in the 1990s, strangely enough, for athletes that didn't want to dope. Cyclists, and it was developed in Austria. You can get it here over the counter in a form called CE3. Its impact on normalizing energy in people that are thyroid deficient, adrenally burnt out, is profound. These are agents that maximize energy efficiency, and to Leonard's point, they're not stimulants. Right. So what you want is mitochondrial improvement. Mitochondria are the little engines in your cells, in your muscle cells, for instance, of which there are thousands inside of any given cell at any given point. They corrupt also with age, and they don't produce energy, which we'll just categorize right now for a moment as ATP. Who hasn't heard of that? Right? The ability for mitochondria to actually, inside a muscle cell, take glucose or sugar or fat, or in some cases protein, and produce energy. With age, you can get leakage, you can get damage with viral infections, with any combinations of those. As Lauren knows very well, I was hit with a really bad case of COVID pneumonia 4.5 years ago after getting sports surgery. It wiped me out. I went from 145 pounds to under 100 when I left the hospital after being infected. I wrote a book about it. And at that point, I just wanted to survive. I had no energy. Every battery system and energy producing system in my body was gone, as was my muscle mass. So it gave me great insight in terms of taking everything that we knew from the field of lifespanning. You know, are there things that could possibly give me a longer life, and could I appropriate it to building a body and building energy? As it turned out, it was true. So things like ANADA made a difference. To Leonard's point, the use of nutrients that affect AMPK, quercetin, ficetine, which are supplements that you take orally, not peptides. And for mitochondrial repair, SS31. Right? There's a couple of others, but let's just say that SS31 is the most convenient of all in terms of a highly measurable effect on repairing mitochondria. You know, that's leaky, that's not working well, that's oxidized. And so there I've given you a number of things to look at, along with nutrients that may make the brain work better because its energy is exhausted. You know, carnitine, acetylcarnitine, now creatine. I'd say buffer creatine so it doesn't affect your stomach and bloat you. These have measurable effects on energy being produced within the brain. And, you know, if you're not utilizing sugar well, again, to Leonard's point, your brain, which consumes a quarter to almost a third sometimes of all available sugar in your body, this little 2-pound organ in less than 1-2% of your body weight is consuming huge amount of fuel. If that's not working well, you're going to be exhausted and tired too. Acetylcarnitine, creatine, and then you can kind of keep looking from there, right?
Thank you. And all this is so helpful. And by the way, we'll have the link out soon, but all of these products on the supplement side are all available through Elsa and the Menopause Marketplace, all of them very highly curated by our experts, including several of everyone here and others. So we'll be sharing that with you as well, so you can get access to all of these in addition. All right, let's say sticking on energy. Anissa, do you want to pull up anything that we missed, anything else in particular for women in perimenopause and menopause and how this kind of relates to how we can use peptides as well as the other things with lifestyle to really support this stage of hormonal life.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about hormone replacement in a few minutes. So I'm going to kind of push that topic off. I think a couple of things I would say, I absolutely agree with everything both Leonard and Oz said, which with regard to level, stable energy levels. And that dietarily, that just goes to really keeping your diet somewhat stable, meaning not overdoing it on the carbs, especially on the refined carbs, because those are going to create the blood sugar highs and the blood sugar lows, which is what we're trying to avoid. And sometimes that can happen with hormone swings, getting those sugar cravings. So that's one that I think we can talk about and we can work more on. I know we're doing a lot of work on that in the menopause side of things, but kind of going back and leaving that as until we go back to hormone replacement and talk about some of that. I'll go back to a couple of things that both Leonard and Dr. Oz said. One, talking about NAD+, I think there's a lot going on research-wise with regard to NAD+, and how NAD+, of course, is in every cell in our body, and it's essential for life, and it's essential for energy optimization. But I think recent findings are showing that the precursors or the building blocks to NAD are very key now to keeping that sustainable level. And one in particular, NR or nicotinamide riboside, is something I actually personally have been on for about 11 years and feel absolutely like it has been beneficial to me in terms of, as I've aged, kind of going through that energy sustenance kind of phase of life, or kind of retaining that energy level. What more recently we've come out with is the findings that it's not just the oral capsules, but now they're actually making that available in both drips and injectable forms, which makes that just a little bit more available to your body. And so I think that's something we should watch. And I think that's something I just recently heard is, kind of just hitting the market now. So again, nicotinamide riboside, looking at that coming out of True Niagen as an example in the injectable and the drip form. And then the other thing, as Oz mentioned, I was waiting for someone to say SS31, which is kind of one of the newer peptides with regard to energy, mitochondrial repair in particular, and kind of weeding out the dead wood, if you want to think about it that way. So that is another one that I would definitely watch. So those are kind of two, I think, on the horizon in terms of energy optimization, especially as we age.
Very cool. Thanks. All right. I mean, part of me wants to ask, because I know there's a lot of discussion, some debate with NAD in particular, right? There's the lozenges, there's the IVs, there's the everyday shots. Everyone's TikTok is blowing up about it. Does anyone want to just, and with NAD, does anyone want to really quickly just help the people here like navigate that a little bit and just understand that if this then that's in terms of the different delivery mechanisms and how that works together and what to be wary of as well?
Leonard's good at this.
Yeah. So NAD is such a enormous topic, right? So NAD, outside of it being a supplement or a compound that we can take, NAD is it's this basically in charge of almost every single enzymatic reaction that we have, right? So your body is constantly using that NAD. It's sucking it up everywhere. And this is why as we age, NAD starts to decline, because you have more inflammation, you have more DNA damage, and NAD is required to help that out. And so that's why it's being pulled in so many different directions. So there's a number of different ways that you can improve NAD, right? Some of it is through IV NADs as well. That's probably going to be the most potent, acute way of getting NAD into the body. But something you have to realize is that NAD is in constant flux in your body. Your body's constantly recycling it and bringing it back together. Right, so you can potentially overdo it, which is not something that's typically talked about. So some of the versions that you can do IV NAD. I typically use this for if I've been through a major infection, or if I've been on a long travel and I know that I've been really worn out for a while and I know I need a boost of something like NAD. But the other option is to use some of these NAD precursors like nicotinamide riboside that Anissa talked about. We know that improves NAD levels. The other ones are things, precursors like NMN is another popular NAD precursor. But then there's other ways of improving NAD. Well, first of all, when you sleep well, NAD is part of the circadian rhythm. In the morning, your NAD naturally rises. So if you get good sleep, you're improving NAD. Exercise improves NAD as well. But the other thing to think about is that there's NAD consuming enzymes, right? So there's enzymes that are attacking your NAD. This enzyme called CD30. So there's supplements like apigenin that inhibit these NAD consuming enzymes. And so if you want like a full on approach to NAD, first you want to replace that NAD somehow. If it's through exercise, through sleep, through IV NAD, or through one of these precursors. But you also probably want to take one of these supplements like apigenin that inhibits the degradation of NAD, because you don't want to just be giving the system NAD and it's going out the back end, right? And so there's a number of different ways. There's a new NAD precursor called 1-methylnicotinamide, and that's probably one of the newest ones that I've been studying that actually works on a different part of the NAD salvage pathway. There's other compounds like 5-amino-1-MQ that also work on NAD. So a number of different things, but I think you have to take it like everything else, this like full-on approach. You can't just give yourself NAD and not sleep and not exercise and eat bad and think that that's going to like overpower it. If you really want to improve NAD, you got to take, this full approach to it.
It's so true. We all want the magic wand to erase everything. And to be honest, peptides, many of these are the closest thing we have to it, but to a point, we have to also take care of ourselves and do the things.
It has to be looked at in context, just like I said. None of this is reducible to one element, one pill, one peptide. It's all in context. It's doing everything that you can, right? Not being a crazy obsessive biohacker, but finding the practices and the protocols, simply enough. There are three that Peter Attia would bring up right away. You got to sleep well. You got to exercise, and you got to manage your diet.
Yeah.
Those are the three smartest things that you can do. And then from there, you can add on, clip on regulating stress and doing your diagnostics properly so that you keep adding stuff on. And it's in that medium where things like NAD and peptides and supplementation have the most measurable effect on your body. Yes, there are certain nutrients that you can't take. Maybe you don't sleep well. So you're doing everything else. Maybe you've got the genetic glitch that makes you wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, right? Like many of us do. So there, using glycine or magnesium glycinate or taurine at bedtime, weirdly enough, taking nicotinamide ribosome at nighttime cuts down on the wake up reflex, which is fascinating. Right. And nobody was thinking of that. There's just newer studies on NAD precursors, to Anissa's point, at that, wow, not only do they do all this great stuff that Leonard said, but it helps us sleep better. Right.
Yeah. It's also fascinating. And even within that, right, we need to work out. Yes, we need to sleep. But what we're learning with science is there's ways that we can do that more effectively, both on the whole as well as for our individual bodies. So that's another piece that we're going to be weaving into all of this. I've never hosted on the webinar on Zoom before. I can't figure out how to do a chat. So a lot of this information is on themenopause.com, on the peptides/peptides. You'll see it at the top. We'll be following up everyone with guidance and materials and next steps for all of these. But I don't know why there's not a chat function on this. So we're going to go quicker on the next few because I want to make sure we have time for questions. I know we have quite a few already. So really quick, Anissa, favorite peptides for body composition, define it, and what are the peptides?
The body composition is really your fat to muscle ratio. So making sure, especially through the menopausal phases, you are retaining the muscle that you have and you're able to build more. So creatine is a huge one. It's been getting a ton of press. It's absolutely for everybody, not just for women, but 3 to 5 grams per day on a daily basis, no hands down, like there should be no option on that one. So that is going to help with muscle development, but it's also going to help, as Leonard mentioned earlier, with cognition. So there's 2 real reasons to take creatine. From a peptide standpoint, I think there's a million of them here. Leonard has mentioned the growth hormone secretagogues like sermorelin, tesamorelin. We've talked about the GLP-1s in terms of, body composition, in terms of fat loss, certainly not muscle enhancement. There are some issues that have been in question about losing muscle mass as you're on a GLP-1, but there's also new versions coming out that have compounds that can help to retain the muscle as well. So that's something we'll probably talk about in a future session. But those are some biggies. I guess I'll leave it at that and toss it over.
Well, we're going to go one by one for this next piece just because we're not going to get through them all otherwise. I'm going to take the next one. If you have anything burning to add, raise your hand or something. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. Sex and, vaginal function dysfunction. Dr. Oz is one of the first ones we talked about. PT 141. Are there anything to dive into for women dealing with issues and wanting to improve these areas?
There's a whole bunch.
Yeah.
You can start with Kispepsin, PT 141. PT 141 is much faster acting, and it can be used as a sexual enhancer in terms of increasing interest by pathways within the brain that have nothing to do with hormones. Whereas Kispepsin, correct me, Lena or Anissa, I think it works by improving hormonal expression, and it works over a longer period of time. So combining both is pretty terrific, and they've both been studied for menopause and menopausal drop in interest, sexual interest. As female hormones like estrogen begin to drop off, certainly testosterone and DH. I think those are at the top of my mind in terms of peptides. I'm looking at melatonin, which is used primarily for men's sexual interest, and it works really fast. And I suspect we're looking at using melatonin too, number 2, also for increasing sexual interest in women too. We just don't have all that data in yet, but Kispepsin, PT 141, terrific. Weirdly enough, low dose Viagra for women, Cialis, seems to work really well. And strangely enough, even though certain doctors and specialists in women's sexual lives have been recommending it for well over 20 years, that it's still not part of the current vocabulary for women.
Yeah, absolutely. I just personally, that's been one that so many women kind of will mention, and they're feeling so confused or ashamed. It's not really talked about. So there's things are really powerful that are great options for women across the board. So that's great. And then last one, I think that's the last of the.
Let me just have one more final thing.
Yeah.
I just remembered that you can actually get compounded Viagra for women in a cream form.
Yeah.
I figure out where that goes, but it does exist, and there are compounding pharmacies that do manufacture for peri and postmenopausal women.
And this is a good segue to the last thing I really wanted to make sure we touched on here. The big question of how do you get peptides? What is the difference? Everyone's hearing about there's different routes to go, right? And we're going to help make some of these as accessible as possible. But I'd love to talk about, the kind of categories of how you get access to peptides, kind of going into actually Dasha's question here, can an MD legally prescribe non-FDA approved peptides, what compounding means, etc. So I'm going to kick it over to Leonard to talk through that piece, especially on the compounding part, and then we'll see we have pieces that need more diving in.
Sure. So the first thing you have to know is that anything that's compounded is non-FDA approved, even if it's coming from an FDA approved product. So if you're talking about semaglutide compounded, even though there's FDA approved versions, as soon as it's compounded, it is not FDA approved. And so when it comes to compounding pharmacy, there are a lot of peptides that are above water, right? So if it was part of a component of an FDA approved medication, like Sermorelin at one point was FDA approved. Oxytocin at one point was FDA approved. Now, again, I don't want to get in trouble. If it's compounded, it's not FDA approved, right? So there are peptides that you can legally prescribe as a physician. Now, there's certain peptides that were being able to be compounded at one point that aren't anymore. And this is where it gets kind of confusing, where you'll see some peptides that are over the counter, right? And so it's like, well, if it can't compound it, why can't it be over the counter? One of the things about compounding is that there's certain things that they allow you to compound with. Doesn't mean that they're dangerous or there's any issue with them. For instance, something like L-theanine. Right, L-theanine is just, you see it on the shelf everywhere, and that's something that they don't want you to compound with, but you'll see it OTC, right? So that's yeah, it's very confusing for people because it doesn't make sense. You think, oh, well, you can't compound it with it, then there's something wrong with it, right? And so that's when you'll see a lot of OTC, orally bioavailable peptides, right? So not many peptides are orally bioavailable. Things like BPC, we know, are orally bioavailable. Things like KPV, right? So you can get a product called Peptides that has BPC and KPV in it that's specific to gut health and immune dysregulation. There's peptides like combinations of BPC and TB4 frag, right? So the fragment of certain peptides, smaller versions that have to do with improving joint pain or inflammation or recovering from injuries. And so you'll see a lot of those that are available. And then there's other things like research peptides that you see out there, which is a little bit scarier because it says for research only, not for human consumption. And I know that a lot of people are getting peptides that way, but just from me on the pharmacist side, I'm probably extra careful because that's just what pharmacists do in the world of compliance and legalities. And so I'm always recommending that someone goes through a physician and goes through a compounding pharmacy. I know that one of the questions were, well, how can you tell if there's so many different peptide selling websites out there? They all claim third-party testing. To be honest, it's very easy to claim a third-party testing. It's a little bit scary out there. You know, it's hard to tell which one's going to be there. I would recommend that you want to make sure it's an FDA registered, manufacturer and try to do some due diligence on there. But the peptide world has been changing so fast. You have RFK saying that he's, stopping the war on peptides with the FDA. Are things going to change? We don't know. And so this is why we go out there and we educate about all peptides because people are taking them. Even physicians, they have patients that are coming in and their patients are getting peptides somewhere else. So I think it's important that everybody is aware of what they are, how they work, what the dosages are. That's my job as a pharmacist, but I got to be very careful on what I recommend when it comes to sourcing because of the world that I live in is more compliance related.
Makes a lot of sense. I am not a licensed anything, so the world is vast. We are not telling anyone what to do or not to do. My job is to curate, bring the best solutions together, and let people make the best decisions. So there's the concierge route, which is really especially if you're just starting out or also just navigating this complex world, it makes a lot of sense to have that support. There's kind of an intermediary world where it's less full support, but can navigate. Then there's more of the Wild West, if you will, research use only. This is not legal for consumer consumption. I'm not telling you what to do or to do, but there are more trusted sources. And so you can ping us for information on that, which we won't share here. It's really an interesting world because something's FDA approved doesn't mean it's good, because it's not FDA approved doesn't mean it's bad. We are in a fluid world, and that is all I'll say on that. Anyone else want to add anything to that topic before we go to Q&A? Okay, and I know we ran a little over, so we'll do hormones another day. But I want to make sure we have time to get into questions. So I have a couple of questions from Louise, which are kind of tied together. It asked about, what about women put into medical menopause? Just a somewhat related question. I think, applies to a lot of women, that for women who had breast cancer, now removing estrogen, what can they do with peptides to minimize these symptoms, like really without, when someone is, for various reasons, not a candidate or doesn't think they're a candidate for HRT, which that is a controversial thing, but I won't go into that.
Yeah. So I think the important thing to know is that all these symptoms that we've been talking about are due to an estrogen fluctuation. It's not it being up or down, it's the fluctuation that's causing these, right? And so supporting the symptoms that are happening, right? So one of the things that we didn't talk too much about is, for instance, that fluctuation and its impact on the microbiome. We did talk a lot about cortisol, about stress, and how that impacts everything. One of the things that we see the most is patients in perimenopause that have bloating, gut health issues, microbiome disruption. And so some peptides that you can use for that are phenomenal are BPC 157 and KPV, right? They're going to reduce inflammation. They're going to reduce inflammation specifically in cells in the colon. And so we know that the gut is so tied in to immune dysregulation. It's tied into glucose and metabolism. And so if we can impact gut health and those microbiome changes that are being impacted by those estrogen fluctuations, it's going to make a big impact, because when you have that microbiome disruption, you are having those increases in inflammation that's further exacerbating all the other issues. And so we have to be, if you're stuck in a situation where you can't get certain hormone therapy, you have to be great at optimizing gut health, optimizing stress, and optimizing sleep. And some of these peptides are phenomenal for doing that.
Amazing. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just add, I think there's so much, I mean, we can talk about HRT and its relationship with breast cancer, because there's been a lot of misinformation on that one. And so I would not pretend to be a physician who's an expert in that area. I would just say it's very, very unique. And so I think finding the right concierge doctor, functional doctor who can help you through the actual specifics, the DNA behind your specific breast cancer. I think that's step one. And I think, again, it goes back to which symptoms we're talking about, because I think that's a very big factor too. So sleep may be very different than libido problems, may be different than just body composition and weight management. So I think it's really dependent and very specific, but I think finding that right medical expert who can help specifically with the breast cancer issues would be helpful.
Amazing. Brenda asks, who is best to advise on the best peptides? Which type of practitioner should give the RX? Is ever a few questions in one, so we'll start with that. And before I'll answer, so that's one of the things we're really excited to be offering here today. So we have partners, and the first in particular that we're going to be sharing the information and allowing you to sign up. We have a pilot program that we put together, as well as we'll be launching peptides and hormones school program. So more information on all that, so we can continue to provide this kind of education across the board, depending on really at every budget. But so in general, who's the best to advise on peptides? Dr. Oz or Anissa, do you want to take that one?
That's a hard call. Everybody's an expert these days, right? So if you go on social media or Instagram, you're either a spiritual consultant or a life coach or a nutrition. I'm not kidding. It's really hard in this kind of environment where everybody's now an expert on some aspect of all this. I think you need to do your homework very carefully, certainly in terms of doing, if you're looking for somebody who's an expert in peptides, that you're searching within the community of functional MDs and begin there. I think probably if you're starting out and you're not all that knowledgeable, finding somebody who's a functional MD and really reputable, right? There are osteopaths that are brilliant at using, there are chiropractors that are brilliant at doing peptides. There are naturopaths, right? So I don't want to just limit it to an MD, but categorically, you can find people across the spectrum, but you gotta, like I said, do your homework. Go to Reddit. Go there. For sure, you're going to find out a lot in terms of people to avoid, people that have great reputations, and I think that's the best way to do it, frankly.
Just to add on to that, I think you're absolutely spot on. I think it's really difficult to navigate. I think, there's the good news is that I think there's more training coming out for physicians, and I think, and for PAs and nurse practitioners, I think there's peptide certification courses coming from some of the different institutions, A4M or, Seeds Institute or whatnot. And I'm not saying I have no affiliation. I'm just throwing a couple names out there, but in general, if someone has gone through some true training or is in the regenerative medical field, I think those are also great sort of credentials to look for that can at least give you a starting point, and then you go to Reddit. Okay,
yes,
for growth background.
There too, what I would say is you're looking at an emerging field in the way that when anti-aging became the next thing, and you had doctors that were specializing in growth hormone, testosterone, DHEA, and estrogen and they were not really understanding how these things worked, either alone or in combination. And you had kind of like the wild, wild west. In some ways, we now have that with peptides. Emerging field, it's very young. Yes, there's a lot of accreditation, but I kind of shoot for the top so that you're really working to whittle this down, because these are concerns that you're going for that are not necessarily medical concerns. They have a lot to do, like Anissa said, with regenerative medicine, regenerative health practices, right?
Exactly. What about testing? If someone has from a question, if I already have a full supplement stack, does that impact which peptides to take? And is it based off of blood work like done for taking supplements?
Yeah, so peptides go really well with supplements. Just to piggyback off the last question, I actually am in charge of creating certification courses for peptide therapy. And so we have a scientific team of cardiologists, orthopedics, pediatricians, nurse practitioners. We have sections and modules on menopause and longevity. And so I think that's the question that you ask is, what's your experience? Who have you been certified by? And just ask to this question here, the crux of that certification course when we're teaching medical providers is it's not necessarily on just on peptide therapy. It's the combination of peptide therapy, other longevity compounds, and supplementation. How do you combine all of this together? The great thing about peptide therapy is that yes, you can add that to your supplement stack already. We know that price is a consideration, and that's something that you want to kind of think about. But the question is, does blood work play a role? Yeah, absolutely. If they see your insulin or glucose dynamics, or they see that you're in a higher inflammatory state, they're going to recommend specific peptides for those situations. Some practitioners that are a little bit more advanced, they'll do gut health test or a stool test, and they'll be able to see what your microbiome looks like. What are you lacking? And so that'll all play a part into how they personalize a treatment for you. But the thing I love about peptides as a pharmacist, because we're always obsessed with drug-drug interactions, is how well they go with other therapies.
Yeah, and Leonard's also the founder of Nubia, as I mentioned, with some really cool supplement, like clinical grade supplements, and they're not really sold to consumers. It's mostly, as you mentioned, to the longevity doctors and other clinicians. We are going to have these available as well, so I'll look out tomorrow. We'll be sending information on all of these things. The numbers are, I forget what the numbers were, but it improves the effectiveness of GLPs by like 70 something percent. I don't usually let people sell, but you can do a little plug because it's really interesting.
Sure. So what we did was we didn't set out to do supplements, but when we were teaching providers, our goal was to what kind of supplementation that's in the literature would amplify peptide therapy. And that's how that all started. We were looking at what are all the pathways that are impacted by peptides and hormones. And so we were creating specific supplementation to enhance and converge on those pathways. So all the supplements that we formulate are technically for providers because we're helping them put complete treatment plans together. But yes, we have specific supplements that are like exercise mimetics that improve GLP-1 protocols. We have certain peptides that are specific to gut health, and so improve gut health protocols. We have a number of supplements that enhance NAD. That's why I kind of went off on the whole NAD conversation because it's a conversation from multiple angles. And so that's what the supplements are based on. It's how do we further enhance that full spectrum of what everybody is doing. And so it's a lot of fun. It's my favorite thing to talk about.
Amazing. Another question from Dasha, who I actually credit is the admin and one of my entree points into this crazy world. It's a great question. So, what type of testing, not like lab testing, but testing for peptides, right? There's over 50 peptide selling websites, all claiming third-party testing. What does that mean if people are trying to navigate that? I know this is, I think, talking a little more of this research use only. So if this group doesn't want to touch on that, that's okay. You tell me.
Go ahead, Dr. Oz.
Well, throw it over to you real quick, and Anissa. It's very subjective, right? You're looking at lab tests to find out where there are problems. You can use biomarker tests like YOLO. You can use genetic testing like Self-Decode or Cornell Wild genetic testing kits. You can use DNA testing kits, and on and on and on. I think there's an NAD testing kit now available from several companies. There's a mitochondrial testing kit. So what they do is they point. It's almost like an arrow that's pointing towards like this is what you're going to do best on, but not like it's not going to give you a definitive answer. Like you need to do SS because you're exhausted and you have mitochondrial function. I mean that's an obvious one, right? And you can confirm it then with the different diagnostic testing that's going to confirm if you've got problems with energy. Right, so it would be an educated guess at that point, a really good one, that doing SS31, other mitochondrial enhancing peptides would probably make a big difference, right? I hope I'm on track with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else on that one? Okay. Yeah. Okay. How long does it take to work, and how long do you need to stay on a specific peptide? We touched a little on this, but I think it's a good question because it's across the board. Who wants to
Yeah.
go? Dr. Oz, this is like kind of your wheelhouse if you want to jump in.
There are peptides that work
Right.
instantly. Yeah, Leonard would tell you this, and what Anissa, you do a spray or two of C-Max or C-Lang, you feel it within a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
Longer neurologically affecting peptides like cerebrolysine, for instance, this works over the course of weeks and months, but you find yourself physically stronger and mentally more resilient by using cerebrolysine, perhaps in small doses, intramuscular, intranasal, or in an IV. And then if you're to Leonard's points in terms of the growth hormone releasing peptides, you can see results with ipamorelin, sermorelin, CJC really within a matter of days. I'm not kidding. 48 to 72 hours later, you're just aware that something's happened. And that's to me, it's always been astonishing. You think maybe having a placebo effect, but you're going to get a better effect by staying on them. If you're on any of the GHR growth hormone releasing hormones at all, peptides, after a month or so, it's very clear, very evident. It's pretty remarkable in that regard.
Yeah, and a lot of it, like everything else, some of these things are complicated. There's protocols, and that's why, working with some of the groups that we brought together, we'll be sending information on. You can, again, if you go to www.themenopause.com/peptides, again, I'll send all of this. We'll be sending more information, and both, with the resources and the tools that we've built with ELSA, as well as with the partner organizations that we work with, they can help you really navigate that to know when do you need to cycle off this or not, which ones are daily, which ones are once a week, etc. And it gets easier and easier over time.
But also add, it just occurred to me again, thymosin and thymosin, both of these are immune stimulating peptides that if you're coming down with a bad sore throat, an upper respiratory infection, a flu, to the extent that you are now approved to inject yourself, you can stop an oncoming infection almost immediately. 10 milligrams of injectable thymosin peptide, cold's over in 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. It is remarkable. And if it's really bad, it's already in your system. You could do it 2 or 3 days in a row. And it just aborts the whole infection.
Great. We're adding that to the list. So we actually don't have that one yet. We're adding that tomorrow. So yeah, I want to have that in my home. New York is filled with colds. All right. I think this last question, and then we're gonna do a really super quick lightning round. Is there a link with GHRH peptides and cancer, and how do these affect cardiac patients? This is a more serious question. One person to answer relatively quickly. Who's best for this?
Sure, I'll take it. So this is a common question with growth hormone releasing hormone when it comes to cancer, because anything that's anabolic or promoting growth, people are obviously going to be worried about its cancer producing properties. There are studies that show that growth hormone releasing peptides can actually have anti-tumor effects, right? So there's nothing that tells us that it's going to do that. Now, if somebody has active cancer, we're always going to treat them differently, right? So you wouldn't use things like high doses of NAD or anything that's going to cause growth or cause angiogenesis or increase in blood flow to like a tumor. Even something simple like glutamine, an amino acid, you wouldn't give somebody with active cancer that. And so there isn't any evidence to show that a growth hormone peptide would do that. But I would be cautious if someone had active cancer. But that's what we would do with anything. We would have completely different treatments. There's a question of, does it affect cardiac patients? This is another big misconception. There was one study where there was a cardiac death in a trial with CJC. It was one death. It was most likely unrelated. They stopped the trial. But you should see our module on our cardiologist that uses growth hormone peptides for a number of different things when it comes to recovery post-MI. So we know a lot of cardiologists that are using growth hormone peptides in cardiovascular disease with amazing results. But these are two very common questions.
Thank you. Okay, super quick lightning round. If you had to pick 3 peptides only, your favorite all time, sorry, I'm springing this on you, which would they be? I'm going to go start with Leonard, keep you in the hot seat.
Sure. I'm going to cheat and say Peptides because it comes with BPC and KPV. Everything is surrounded by the gut. So I'm going to go with Peptides. GLP-1s, of course, because any GLP-1 you pick it's I have a problem with eating too much food, and it's the only way I can control my appetite. I love eating food. And then the other one is one of the growth hormone peptides. Just like the ability to recover from exercise is just, is priceless. So those are my three.
Okay, a gut, a GLP, and growth hormone. Okay,
Yep.
cool.
But believe it or not,
You get to choose three.
Pidilon, I love it. I was using it for
What's that one again? What's it for?
Epitalon.
Mhm.
Epitalon. It's spelled Epitolan, I
Some
think.
Yeah.
people call it epitalon.
I know, it was more like, what's it for people who forgot?
For increasing telomeres, the tips of DNA.
Okay.
That's what it's designed for, but it converts into serotonin, into melatonin, makes you feel really well, and it makes you sleep deeper. Number one, C-Lank and C-Max. There's a form of C-Lank called acetyl C-Lank amidate. It's a longer molecule, and it makes you happy real fast. And then, because I'm a guy and I'm in my 70s, melatonin is my third favorite for my personal life.
Fantastic. Anissa, top
Yeah,
three.
I mean, I guess I want to live forever. So I'm on the SS31 bandwagon there of mitochondrial repair, because I do believe it's had, I just believe it's had beneficial impacts. Some of it's probably that I believe it, some of it is research on it. I am a fan, of course, BPC 157. It has solved a lot of tissue repair problems for me over the years, I believe. I shouldn't say I believe, it has. And then thirdly, I have to go with Leonard. I got the jelly bean problem. So, the GLPs can kind of help to subdue that a little bit. So yeah, those are my three faves.
Amazing. And we're basically at time. Anissa, did you want to add a little more about our partnership program, which we'll be sending information about as well?
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely excited to be in this space, and are always watching kind of what's, cutting edge. So we do have a partnership with a group called Beyond Concierge Medical. So we'll be sending out email follow-up after this. So you'll have more information, just educating you on how the process works. And then if there are any questions, my email is at the bottom of that email that's going out. I'm happy to engage with anybody who's got any questions as a follow-up to this event tonight, and appreciate everyone showing up, and more to come from us in the future. And thank you both to Leonard and Oz for joining us and being so expert, amazing on this topic tonight.
Yes.
You got
Thank
it.
you
Thank
all
you.
so much.
Yes.
We'll share information, and
Can't believe how much we all know. I'm really impressed with Denise. I've been taking notes the whole time.
and there's so much more. We're really
There's so much
scratching
more.
the surface here. So I always say, like, my job is so cool. I just get to talk to these brilliant experts, and I feel like the more I know, the more I realize I know almost nothing, and that's where we're here. So let's keep cracking it open. Thank you all who joined us. I'm so excited. This was amazing, and I can't wait for more great things to come. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, buddy.
Bye-bye.